Hi, it's Sachi, and this is the wrap dress I made in stretch velvet. I used the base pattern from this video and made it into the wrap style front and connected to the skirt part. The skirt is made with 4 panels to go around the hip and 1 panel for the overlap in the front. I saved this wrapping paper to use as pattern paper. Wrapping paper is nice because sometimes they have 1-inch grid on the back. These numbers include seam allowances. To figure out your own numbers, first you take your waist and hip measurements, then add some wearing ease, and divide the numbers by 4 and then add seam allowances. Or you can follow these exact numbers and use 1/2-inch seam allowances. And the measurements of the finished skirt will have 36-inch waist and 44-inch hip. I made it bigger than I thought I would need to make sure I don't end up with too small pieces because you can always make them smaller. I had 3 yards of 60-inch wide stretch velvet, and because you can only cut velvet in one direction, I didn't have enough fabric to make the skirt much bigger. But if you have a lot of fabric and want to make the skirt flay out even more, make the shape more like this. So like I just said, velvet fabric has direction called nap. When you feel the fabric, there is a direction that feels smoother than the other, and the light reflects differently. There is no right or wrong and you can pick whichever direction you like, but you need to stick to one direction, or your finished garment will look like it's made from 2 different kinds of fabric. The savage edges were pulling and skewing the fabric, so I decided to cut them off before cutting out any pieces. I wanted to use these edges for binding later, so I cut them in nice long pieces. I folded the fabric along the grain to cut out the skirt piece. Place the straight edge of the pattern along the folded edge and place fabric weight or pin the pattern in place. The skirt pattern was 29 inches long because that was the biggest wrapping paper I had, but I wanted to make it a little bit longer, so I added 2 inches to the hem before cutting out. I need to cut out 5 pieces of the same pattern. Before putting these pieces aside, mark the center at the waist by notching about 1/4 of an inch. Connect 5 skirt pieces together to make one big piece. Sew with 1/2-inch seam allowances. I used 4-thread lock stitch on my serger, cutting off extra seam allowances. You can sew on a regular sewing machine using small zigzag stitch. You can also use regular straight stitch on the regular sewing machine, stretching slightly as you sew. Once you have one big piece of skirt, try wrapping it around yourself to see if you like the fit. For the top, I used my base pattern and I used the hemline A. I want to make the sleeves longer, so I placed the pattern leaving some space for the longer sleeves. I made sure the pattern is on the grain and traced the edges with chalk. I extended the waistline by 6 inches and went up 2 inches. But I feel this could have been 1 inch. It depends on the stretch of your fabric and your body shape. So go up 1 to 2 inches, then connect with the neckline as shown. Redraw the waist by connecting it to the neckline. From the side, come in 2 inches and redraw the underarm line. I added 2 inches to the sleeve length. For the back bodice, use the back bodice of the base pattern and fold at the hemline A like the front bodice. Trace the shape with chalk. To match the front bodice shape, come in 2 inches from the side and redraw the underarm. At the center back of the waistline, measure up 1 inch and redraw the waistline to the point. Then from the center back, measure in ½ an inch at the waistline. Draw a straight line from that point to about halfway up the center back line. And don't forget to lengthen the sleeve to match the front. For the waist ties, I cut two 2-inch wide strips, which are quite long because I wanted to determine the length after the dress is done. I saved these savage edges. They were about 1 inch wide and I thought they would be perfect for binding the neckline. First, I sewed the center back with 4-thread lock stitch with my serger by cutting off the excess seam allowances. All these seams can be done by regular straight stitch or small zigzag stitch. Experiment with remnant fabric to see what works with your particular fabric. Next, I serge together the shoulder seams. While you're at it, overlock edges of the underarm seam allowances, but don't sew them together yet, because you want to leave a hole about 3/4 of an inch for the waist tie to go through on one of the underarm seams. When you sew the stretch velvet with straight stitch, pull in opposite directions in front of and behind the needle. You are not pushing the fabric and letting the machine feed the fabric naturally. This will ensure that the stitch is a little bit stretchable despite that it is a regular straight stitch. Open the seam allowances and stitch around the opening. I bound the neckline before putting the top and the skirt together. I used 1-inch strip I cut out from the savage edges. I pinned the strip around the neckline with right sides together and sewed 1/4 of an inch from the edge. Fold the strip toward the seam allowances and stitch on the binding strip and seam allowances close to the previous seam. Then fold the binding strip over the seam allowances and fold again and stitch. I folded the 2-inch strip in half and stitched at 3/8 of an inch from the edge, stretching it slightly under the needle. Flip right side out and stitch around the edge. On the skirt, I folded the vertical raw edges twice and stitched them down. And for the skirt hem, I simply overlocked it and turned up 1 inch and machine stitched. To connect the top and the skirt, I lined up the edge of the first panel to the front edge and the notch for the center of the second panel to the side seam of the top. The front of the top is longer than the front of the skirt, so I made 2 rows of long machine stitches together up the middle of the front of the top. Comments from the future self is that I probably should have made these gathering stitch closer to the side seam and away from the center front a little. It's a design preference, but I feel that this might have looked better in my opinion. Gather up the front of the top until it matches the front of the skirt. Match the center notch of the middle panel with the center back of the top. Repeat what you did with the other side and sew the waistline together. Attach the waist tie to the both front edges and the dress is complete. To wear the dress, put one of the waist tie through the small hole you made close to the waistline and wrap and tie the waist ties. It's a very comfortable dress because of the stretch of the fabric. If I were to make the second version, I would make the waist to fit a bit tighter and flare out the skirt hem a bit more. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you in my next video.